Hey everyone, this is JelArts and I'm back with another video, and this time I'm doing the Crayola marker challenge. So I basically took a sketch that I made in my sketchbook and I scanned it onto the computer and I made it larger, and then I printed it off, and then I just drew over that sketch just to refine it a bit, and then I trace it onto my light box after that. So right now I'm just using a Prismacolor color erase in like the red one, and I'm just adding details and refining things with it. The sketch was too rough for me, so I wanted it to be more clear of what it actually was and like what all the details were. And I know the hand is really messed up in the sketch, but I end up fixing it later on, so you'll see that. And then after I used the red pencil, I went over it in my mechanical pencil. The lead is pretty soft in that, so it's a nice dark line and it's good for refining any details you might have. And I was kind of trying to do like a fall theme with this one because it's finally fall now, and I just love like fall outfits and fall colors and just anything like autumn related. So now I'm just taping it to, I'm using regular printer paper with the Crayola markers because I wanted to see what I could do just with regular paper. And I found that my marker paper, it chewed up the surface more than it did printer paper, so I decided to try using that, and you'll see how that goes after I finish inking. When I finished inking it, I noticed a lot of things were off about it, and I also messed up on a lot of parts, so I scanned it onto my computer and I edited it in Photoshop and Paint Tool SCI just to, like, I wanted to redraw the hand digitally because it just wasn't turning out the way I was doing it traditionally. So I did that, and I adjusted some of her proportions because her shoulder is like too far over and her other shoulder should be visible. But I ended up coloring one version of it. So when I printed it originally, it printed gray, but I didn't realize I was out of black ink, so that's why it was gray. But this is before I scanned it. And now I'm just testing out the colors onto the sketch I did, just to see what color palette I want to use and how they blend together. And it was very challenging. There's definitely a learning curve with Crayola markers, but you can still do nice things with it. It's just a bit different from the alcohol-based Copic markers or anything that's alcohol-based because they blend a lot easier, and it's a lot more easy to get smoother tones with alcohol-based markers, but Crayola markers are water-based, so that's why it's very patchy when you color, and it just tears up the surface of the paper if you don't let it dry in between coats. That was the most helpful thing that I learned. You can't do more than like 2 coats of wet Crayola marker. You have to let it dry or it will chew up the paper. So that was something I learned. And I think most of this drawing was a learning process, so if I ever did it again, I would remember what I learned, and it would be an easier process because I don't actually end up using this drawing that you see me coloring because the coloring turned out kind of badly. Everything started to smear, especially the multi-liners, which was really annoying. So I ended up printing it off again, and luckily the printer printed it gray like I said before, so there was, because I was out of black ink, so that way I could color it in and it looked like pencil lines, and once I finished coloring I could outline it with my multi-liner, and that way the colors didn't smudge the multi-liner. But in my first attempt here, the multi-liner did smudge. So now I'm just using a technique I discovered where you dip a paintbrush in water and you like rub it on the end of the Crayola, and it's almost like creating a watercolor effect, and that's a really good way to get lighter tones because Crayola markers are pretty dark. There's not really any light colors, like there's no pale colors. I could have just done a darker skin tone, but I really wanted to try this effect. But maybe if I do it again, I'll try to do it without this technique, but I found it really fun, and it gives you some nice colors. Like, it actually worked surprisingly well, except for the fact that if you color on it when it's soaked like that, it will bleed everywhere. Like, it will, that's the main mistake I made with this drawing. is I tried to color, like I colored too close to a wet area, so it just seeped right into that and started smearing, kind of like how real watercolors do. And I assume that it'll come out of the brush because I think they're washable, but if they're not, it's no big deal because the brushes I use are pretty cheap anyway. So here is my second attempt. After modifying it a little bit more, I was getting really picky with this drawing and just like the shoulders and all the anatomy, and I just decided, you know what, this video is mostly a challenge and I'm just trying to experiment, so it doesn't have to be perfect. And I also use a different hair color, and I tried to make it smoother, and oddly enough, if you color in like a circular motion, it works for smaller areas, it gets pretty smooth, but for larger areas it just looks patchy because by the time you get back to where you were just coloring, it's already dry, and as soon as you overlap, it just gets like 10 times darker. The coloring in like a circular motion works really well for pencil crayons and Copic markers, but for Crayolas, you have to be really careful with how you lay down the color or it'll be patchy. The best way I found was just coloring back and forth really quickly, but this could cause you to go outside of the lines, so you have to find that balance between smoothness and like accuracy, and I'm sure you can practice and eventually master using these because they have like good colors and they're not too like difficult to use. It's just the shading and the blending that is the hard part, but you can still make nice drawings with like cheaper markers like Crayola. It just depends on the artist and how they use their materials and the knowledge they have. It's not how good the materials are, it's the talent or skill of the artist and how they use it. So that's a good point when doing these like cheap supply challenges, because even though they're called cheap, it doesn't mean that they're bad or that they're like impossible to use. It's just using something that you're not as comfortable with, and it's a good way to challenge yourself. I know some people use these on a regular basis and they can get amazing results with them because they're so practiced, but unlike me, I really don't use them that much aside from school projects when I was in school, because they're so vivid and they're really good for like posters and stuff like that. But you can definitely do some nice things with any material. It just depends on the artist. It's not how cheap it is. So I kind of like the colors I used in her sweater. I just wish that there wasn't such a large patch of brown like on her chest. I feel like it's too big of a highlight, but every time I tried to fix it, it would get darker, so I had to leave it. Like otherwise it would have just turned out horribly. So with her skirt, I started off doing the circular motion of coloring, but then I ended up just like coloring really quickly side to side, and that way gives you a really even laydown of colors. And the skirt actually turned out smoother than everything else in the video once it dries, because they take a while to dry. So if it looks like really patchy at first, it's just dark and it hasn't dried yet. So once it dries, everything looks lighter, and it you can't really tell what it's going to look like until it dries. Kind of like watercolor, because these are water-based markers. And I did everything as I usually would if I colored with Copic. So I used my gel pen, I did some highlights, and then I added too many highlights on her face and I tried to remove them a bit, but then they turned gray and it just wasn't working, so her face is a little bit messy and I didn't want to go through it all again. So here's my 3 attempts, the colored sketch, the one in the middle, and then my final version right there, doing some final modifications to her skin tone and just trying to make it a little bit more yellowish rather than pink, because skin has all different colors in it, like purple, pink, yellow, orange. It's mostly purple, red, and green. It's like a mixture between those, but it always looks like tannish, yellow, orangish kind of color. So I hope you enjoyed seeing my attempts using Crayola markers. It was really fun and really frustrating, but I kind of liked the result. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.